SeniorLivingGuide.com podcast discusses topics which are relevant to the everyday lives of seniors and their caregivers. We are joined by experts who share their knowledge on a variety of issues. SeniorLivingGuide.com podcast offers solutions and resources to create the best quality of life as we age. And now, let's welcome your host, Darlene Mahoney.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of SeniorLivingGuide.com podcast. We want to thank our listeners who have been the key to our success as we enter our third season of Senior and Caregiver Resource Podcasts. Our podcast can be listened to and followed most anywhere you enjoy music or podcasts, such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and even Alexa, and many more. And please don't keep our podcast all to yourself. Share with a senior or caregiver who you think will benefit from the support that we provide. I am your host, Darlene Mahoney, and I am excited to share the news that SeniorLivingGuide.com provides a one-stop shop to finding senior housing, including independent and active seniors, a new home, while providing an excellent resource to assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care, or even home health and caregiving services solutions, and one easy-to-navigate website. So visit SeniorLivingGuide.com today. And I would also like to thank our podcast sponsors, Parish Healthcare and Parish Medical Center. At Parish, they offer the Parish Senior Consultation Center and Parish Senior Solutions, where each patient's evaluation and follow-up care will be personalized to meet the needs of the individual and their families.
At Parish Healthcare, we believe in our community. We believe in keeping our community safe. We believe in the art of healing. We believe in healing patients, healing families, healing communities. We believe in the best and brightest working together for the common good. At Parish Healthcare, our team focuses on you as an individual because every life is a work of art to us. Parish Healthcare, where the art of healing comes to life. Visit parishhealthcare.com/healthaware for a free health risk assessment.
I am really excited today to have Ron Culberson. He has a master's degree in social work. Ron spent the first part of his career working in a large hospice organization as a clinical social worker, middle manager, and senior leader. As a speaker and humorist, and author of 4 books, including Do It Well, Make It Fun, The Key to Success in Life, Death, and Almost Everything in Between. Ron's mission is to change the workplace culture so that organizations are more productive and staff are more content. He was the 2012-2013 president of the National Speakers Association and is recognized expert on the benefits of humor and laughter. I would love to have that title, is the expert of humor and laughter. But I'm really excited to have you on our podcast today because we're going to talk about the benefits of humor and laughter.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And let me just qualify that. That simply means that I did my graduate research on it and read a lot about it. So maybe it's a self-proclaimed expert.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. You and I met, I don't want to say by accident, but I was at a conference in Virginia, the Virginia Assisted Living Association conference, and you were a speaker there, which I didn't see your presentation. So you were a keynote speaker, I believe, but I did pick up one of your books, Is Your Glass Half Full? Some thoughts on seeing the humor in life. And I read it. It absolutely was incredibly uplifting and super relatable to myself and my life. I really wanted to be able to share its message and what you brought into my life to our seniors and caregivers and really anyone that enjoys our podcast. So
I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. You know, when you write things and you put it out there in the universe, you never know necessarily, unless someone actually takes the time to let you know. It's kind of just out there. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to share some of the stories that you had in your book itself, because you worked in hospice, and most people don't think of humor and hospice in the same sentence. So tell us a little bit about, how you kind of navigated that, being someone that was working in hospice and finding that you still need to have a sense of humor per se?
It's interesting because I did my graduate thesis on humor, and most of the professors in graduate school were not really hip on me doing humor for my papers. They kind of thought that was not an academic subject. And in fact, it didn't really become a highly academic subject until the late 70s, early 80s. And I was in grad school in the mid 80s. So it still wasn't something that people really felt was valuable to study. I think that's changed since then. But anyway, so I had that under my belt and I already had sort of a perspective on humor. And when I came out of school, I was actually trained in mental health. So I thought I would end up in a mental health counseling center or doing a private practice or something. But I ended up getting a job in hospice care, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I had had an experience with a nephew that had died of cancer, and I realized I was 25, and nobody really ever talked to me about death and dying, and yet it's something that we will all experience. And I found that somewhat interesting from a sort of a life coping perspective. Anyway, so I took the job, and I think what most people that work in hospice will tell you is, first of all, it feels like it's more than a job. It's really a philosophy. It's a way of living. It's a perspective on life. But we also feel very privileged to be in that environment, to be with people at that point in their life. But it was also some of the most fun people I ever met in my life because I believe they got it. They understood the need for balance. My boss, within the first week of my job, she was meeting with me and during my orientation, and she said, I just want to warn you that you're going to hear some humor behind the scenes from people. And it's going to be dark humor at times. And she said, that's how we cope. Don't be offended by it. And of course, coming from a perspective that I studied humor, I wasn't surprised at all. And that was just right up my alley. But I think these people understood the need for balance because on a day-to-day basis, they saw death and dying, and they realized that they had to somehow counter that. But on top of that, I would say funny things happen everywhere. When people have their last dying breath, funny things can happen. And it's not that we always introduce humor in those situations, because that might not be appropriate, but I have never seen a situation where humor couldn't happen. But it happens organically. And that's the best part of that work, is when you're in this very serious situation and something funny happens and it becomes a release for people. It allows some of that stress and tension that they're carrying to get out. So I found it to be the perfect place to combine humor with the work I was doing. So it just really meshed very well for me.
Right. And for me, I had two parents that went through hospice. It's very tense for family, very tense for even the patient that's in hospice, if they're aware. And humor can be a release. I even had a friend that was going through cancer for several years, and she was very young. And one of the things that she said when we'd get on the phone is she'd say, I want to talk about everything but cancer. I don't want to talk about it. And she and I used to have a great time together. So it would be, I'd tell her funny stories, because for me, utilizing humor was a source of, I will do that to release stress or to make a tense situation less tense. It's almost a coping mechanism for me, I guess.
Yeah, and just since you brought that up, I would point out that it's a wonderful coping mechanism, and there are a lot of studies, both psychologically, physically, spiritually, socially, that indicate that it's a great coping mechanism. Now, I will just say the one sort of advice I would give people is that if it's what you use instead of coping, then it becomes a defense mechanism, and then it's something that's kind of keeping you from dealing with things. So I think there's a fine balance there. It's the idea that we can enjoy humor, embrace it. It allows us to release the stress, but we're also, addressing the stress, and we're facing it, and we're dealing with the grief or the loss or whatever might be going on. So it's a balancing act.
Right. And I also feel like, when you're dealing with seniors and the issues that they're going through, letting them have those experiences where they're enjoying and laughing and telling, the dad jokes or the bad jokes or whatever. And we as family and caregivers, and we're having a grief or a sorrow moment because we know that they're ill or what have you. You still have to let them have those moments. I think it's important to laugh with them and enjoy those moments with them because they're still living. And I think, I don't know, I feel like we get so serious sometimes in we don't always have to be so serious.
Right. I had a story in the book, and I'll share it, and you probably read this, that I had a patient one time who was terminally ill, and I went in to visit him, and it's kind of a weird question, but you say how you're doing, and what you really mean is how you're doing today. How are things today? But I said, how are you doing? And he said, I feel like I've got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel. And I said, that's hilarious. And he just burst out laughing, and we had this moment. And then I went on to talk to him about humor, and he said, the thing about it is that my family and I used to get together in the evening, have joke-telling sessions. We'd watch funny videos. We'd tell stories. And he said, since I've been sick, they treat me as if I'm already dead. They're so solemn around me. We no longer have those moments of fun and laughter. So we had a family meeting. We got everybody together, and we said, hey, he was talking about this, and he explained the situation. And they just didn't realize. They were dealing with their own grief, and they didn't realize how that was impacting on him. So that very night, they went to Blockbuster, which is dated. Nobody, all of us old people know what Blockbuster is. But they went to Blockbuster that night, and they rented a bunch of videos, and they sat there and watched comedy movies for a couple of days. So that, to me, is a perfect example of where we can find that balance. We're dealing with the reality of what's going on, but yeah, let's also enjoy the fun when we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had a quote in your book, and it's from Winston Churchill, that I really liked. And it is my belief you cannot deal with the most serious things in the world unless you understand the most amusing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that kind of lends towards that balance and understand.
Yeah. And I think also there's a lot of truth in humor. And there's a lot of sort of cognitive things that go on when you're enjoying humor, when you're watching humor, when you're experiencing humor, that I think leads to insight and it leads to understanding. I truly believe that, what always drew me to comedy when I was a kid, I watched comedy all the time, was that I just felt like these people were really smart. They were taking things that all of us saw and turning them upside down, and we went, oh, that's hilarious. And that insight and that way of looking at the world, I think, also helps us then to deal with the serious things, because we're creating new neural pathways, new ways of seeing and understanding.
Right. Is there an endorphin release?
Yep.
I feel like if you are laughing and you have some kind of stress relief of some sort that just kind of helps you cope with, any anxiety that you might be feeling with maybe a loved one that's sick, or if you are the one that's sick, it kind of gives you some kind of a relief from all those worries that you might be carrying.
Yes, studies have actually shown, and it's interesting how they do these studies. When they study how people tolerate pain, one of the ways that they study this is they put people's hands in a bucket of ice, and then they see how long they can keep it there. And then they measure different things and how it affects how long they can keep it there. And they found that when people are watching a funny movie, they can keep their hand in a bucket of ice longer, which would imply that we can tolerate more pain. The first thing I ever read about this was Norman Cousins wrote a book in 1978 called Anatomy of an Illness. And in that book, he talked about how he had a serious, debilitating illness he had a lot of pain. And he found that if he could laugh for 10 minutes, he could sleep pain-free for 2 hours. So rather than taking the pain medicines that the doctors were giving, that's what he started doing to manage his pain. And he would watch these old comedy shows, or Candid Camera, this television show a long time ago that was funny. And he found that was how he could manage the pain. So he was really the first one that kind of put it out in the public eye and said, hey, this is real. We need to study this. We need to understand it. And I will put a disclaimer on that one of the things that's difficult when studying humor is there's a lot of other stuff going on, and we can't always pinpoint cause and effect. But we do know that it happens. So when you laugh, there is an endorphin release. You have somebody said an internal massage where the muscles vibrate. They found in a study with children with hemophilia, they bleed less when they laugh more. So there are all these physical things. Now, whether it's actually the laughter and humor causing that is harder to discern because there's other stuff going on. But the fact that we know that it happens means to me that we can do it and get some benefit from it.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm, someone that utilizes humor to distract from others. And
right.
When my mom had cancer, when she was initially diagnosed, it was shocking to us because she had gone into the hospital for a really outpatient to remove what was supposed to be a cyst. I mean, she wasn't even supposed to be in the hospital. Well, I get this call that it's ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer is something you don't ever want to hear. It's definitely a very hard to cure cancer, especially in the later stages, which is very difficult to find in the early. So she had been asleep for days because when they went in, it became a radical surgery. So she was unaware of everything that was happening, and she came out of it. I had come down to Florida. I was about 6-7 hours away, and my sister was there and my dad was there, and both of them apparently were just not wrapping their head around what was going on. And they were just not in a great state. And while I wasn't, I had to keep things light to not freak my mother out when she came out from being subdued after this massive surgery to find out she had cancer, and it was a stage 3 cancer. But it really did relieve a lot of the stress for very long periods of time for both my parents and my sister, to just kind of keep things even keeled. And my mom would always apologize to the physicians. Oh, you've got to ignore my daughter. She thinks she's so funny. But in all honesty, I think it's what kept my mom, from losing it, because I would crack jokes at the worst times just to kind of keep things from just getting way too serious.
Yeah. There was a guy who was one of the people that studied humor, and somebody that I crossed paths with a couple of times over the years, and his name was C.W. Metcalf. I think he has passed away, but years ago he was diagnosed with a brain tumor and he had to go in for surgery, and it was something like a 5% chance that he would survive. It was really a very, very very, very serious surgery. The night before, the physician was talking with him, or the afternoon before, and was just saying basically, he said to him, do you have all your affairs in order? And C.W. Metcalf looked at the doctor and said, I'm monogamous. And the doctor got really, really upset with him because he wasn't taking it seriously. And he goes, no, I'm taking this seriously, but this is how I cope.
Right.
I think that's what we do, and that's sometimes when it's hard to get our heads around something, or really to go to that depth of emotion, that we can kind of keep it light. Like I said, again, as long as we're not avoiding it completely, I think that's great, and it's a wonderful way to kind of help us to keep hopeful and to keep positive, and to put a little bit of a lighter twist on serious situations.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I think we're going to take a quick break for our podcast sponsors, Parish Healthcare, and then we're going to come right back and we're going to chat some more.
Hey, Mom, how's the retirement home search coming?
Oh, my gosh, I'm just so stressed out. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, why are you so stressed? What's the matter?
I don't know where to find anything. I just need everything in one place and know what all the options are.
Does the idea of searching for senior housing seem overwhelming and you just aren't sure where to even begin? SeniorLivingGuide.com has great news for you. We offer a one-stop solution to take the stress out of your senior housing search. At SeniorLivingGuide.com, both our statewide Florida edition book and website are created to make your senior housing search very easy for you to navigate. We provide details on communities, including retirement, assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care, and home health, allowing you to decide which best fits your needs and then connecting you directly with those communities. Visit us online at SeniorLivingGuide.com.
At Parish Healthcare, we believe every life is poetry in motion, motivated by strength and determination. As your bone, muscle, and joint healthcare partners, we believe in blending the art of healing with the science of medicine to keep your body in motion. We believe in healing patients, healing families, and healing communities. For a free orthopedic health assessment, visit parishhealthcare.com/orthoaware. Parish Healthcare, where the art of healing comes to life.
Once again, thank you so much for our podcast sponsors, Parish Healthcare and Parish Medical Center. And we are back with Ron Culberson. So one of the quotes from the book that I absolutely loved, and so I'm going to talk about that, and then we're going to expand on that, is humor balances the negative effects of pain. It also balances the burden of adversity by giving us a break from the ongoing barrage of stress in our lives. Let us give you a few examples in which humor was just what the doctor ordered.
Well, so we talked a little bit earlier about some of the physical benefits of humor, and And those are fine, but I really sort of hang my hat on the psychological benefits of humor. And there are two that I think are very critical for us to understand. The first is that humor balances stress. And the second is that it changes our perspective. Humor changes the way we see things. So let's talk about the balance part of it. When you look at the researchers around the area of stress, what we know is that if we can get a break from stress, it allows us time to rejuvenate and to kind of continue to cope. So any break whatsoever from stress gives you the ability to continue coping with stress. If you think about a marathon, if you stop for a few minutes running, you feel some rejuvenation and then you can keep going. When you take a break from work, it allows you time to replenish and keep going. So the same is true with stress. So how humor does that is it gives us a relief for a moment, and it almost creates a barrier so that the stress cannot just continue to penetrate. If we can't do it naturally, we find opportunities to enjoy humor. What that means is we got to look for it. The more you see, the more you'll see. And I think what's so fascinating about that is it is everywhere, but we're not looking for it. So to give you an example, relevant to some folks that might listen to this podcast, is I was speaking to the staff of a senior daycare center, a place where folks go during the day for activities and networking and, community and that kind of thing. I went into the restroom, and when I was in one of the stalls in the bathroom, and when I turned to leave, there was a sign on the inside door of the stall that said, "Did you remember to wash your hands?" And I'm thinking, okay, I'm still in the stall.
Yeah.
It should say, "Don't forget to wash your hands."
Exactly.
But it said, "Did you remember?" And I'm thinking, well, there's only one place in here to wash my hands.
Yes. And
right?
that would be bad.
So that's an example of me, is if you're really paying attention, there's something right there for the taking that benefits everybody. But you have to be looking for it. You have to pay attention to it. I remember talking about this in a presentation once where a company had a client that hadn't paid their bills for 9 months. So the company sent an invoice to the client, and on the top of the invoice, in big bold letters, it says, "Your invoice is now 9 months overdue. We carried you longer than your mother did."
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And I just think that's hilarious. So it's, and if you're a client and you're receiving that invoice and you look at it, and that's going to make you laugh, you're going to have a different relationship. It's going to give you a break from whatever else stress you might be experiencing. And when I was in hospice care, there was a volunteer that worked for us, and her job was to go through the obituaries to make sure that we didn't miss any donations that were sort of directed our way from anybody's obituary. So she would record those and then give them to our donation department. But she had this other job, I called it a covert operation. She was finding funny obituaries and sending them to me. So she would find these funny things in the most serious part of the newspaper.
Right.
One of them appeared on April 14th. The date was April 14th. And it said this woman died unexpectedly in her sleep on April 17th.
Ooh, that's spooky.
So it's 3 days early, and we're like, should we warn her? Should we call her and say, "Don't go to sleep on the 17th. It's not going to end well." One of them one time said, "Mr. Johnson went to be with Jesus at his home in Palmyra, Virginia." So, you get where these are coming from, but those are funny things. Now, see, many people would miss those. They would just gloss right over them, but she was really intent on finding them because she felt like she was doing me a favor. And so that's what the looking for it does. It gives us a break. But the second part, which is probably the most powerful coping skill that we can learn, is to change our perspective. And the very nature of humor is that it changes our perspective. If you break down a joke has a setup and a punchline. The punchline changes your perspective. You're led down one way, and then it shifts gears, and then all of a sudden you now see it from a different perspective. And that's what humor does. The obituary is on April 14th, she died on April 17th. It's a right turn. It's making us see things from a different perspective, like, hey, she's not dead yet. That's what you think is where the humor comes from. It's that change of direction. It's actually, in the literature, they call it an incongruity. It's something that is connected but disconnected at the same time, and that's where the humor comes from. Well, what a great gift that is to then train our brain to look at the world differently. I call it the dog whistle effect, where when the dog hears a whistle, he tilts his head sideways. And we need to do that. We need to just go through life and something happens. We go, can I look at this a different way? Or is there some humor here that I'm missing? or I'm not seeing because I'm not looking carefully.
Yeah.
That's the perspective part of it. And that helps us cope with stress too, because then we start seeing stress differently.
Exactly. And I think it's looking for those things on a daily to try to find the joy and humor in everyday life. And I think if we, to be frank with you, take our noses out of our phones,
right,
and off of laptops and iPads and start looking around at the world and the people around us when we're even standing in stores or speaking to people at the grocery store or in restaurants. There is so much that's happening around us and we miss so much that I think that we really do a disservice to ourselves when we're just not paying attention to some of these things. I honestly, when I'm out and about, I find so much humor with little kids that are just out with their parents and they're doing different things and they're saying things or they're even speaking to you. They are really just a source of humor and joy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because just this past Sunday I was in church and the pastor was talking to a bunch of kids and asking them what the three kings came to Jesus and what they brought. And it was gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And the kids said gold, myrrh, and Frankenstein. And everybody just cracked up. I mean, it was hilarious. But, I think the other thing when you talked about the phones, I think there's an important kind of weird dilemma with all that because we're exposed to way more humor on our phones than we ever were in history. So the benefit of the phones is we have access to all this humor that's right there. The problem is that if we're here watching the phone, we're missing it out there in the world. And so I think, again, we go back to there has to be a balance.
Absolutely.
I was at a basketball game last night, and two people sat down in front of me, two young people, and the first thing they did, they sat down and took a selfie. Immediately, that was the first thing they did. And I thought, we can get to a point where we're taking so many selfies, we're not looking beyond the phone to see what might actually be going on around us. So it's a fine balance of using what we have available, but also making sure we're not missing things.
Absolutely. But I'm a dad joker. It's because my dad was a terrible dad joker and I inherited the gift. So, you're telling the story about the death date versus when it was posted. And I'm just thinking I would have started taking it a step further. And her job description was fortune teller. I would have made it a really bad. Yeah, it would have gone worse. It would have gone bad. We talk on this podcast about all these different subjects like navigating depression for seniors and caregivers because it's a very relevant topic because especially in the last couple of years, it's become epidemic as far as the depression in both of those, areas of seniors and their caregivers. Clearly, dementia has increased. Any cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, those types of things have just continued to increase. And, grief, these different types of subjects. And I feel like they're such a negative. And I really wanted to bring something that's positive, that brings joy into people's lives as they're aging and how they can utilize something really positive to make them happy on a daily basis. I think we need to look for joy every single day. How do you bring joy into your life? How you can bring laughter?
Yeah, I do a lot of reading and studying about mindfulness, and one of the harsh realities about mindfulness is basically understanding that whatever we're experiencing is what we're experiencing. That's it. What happens is that we're experiencing something and then we go into our heads and make whatever we're experiencing worse by what our head tells us about what we're experiencing. So we're in a traffic jam and we say, oh, I'm in a traffic jam. I hate being in a traffic jam. Well, we've now taken the traffic jam and turned it into something that we hate. It's just a traffic jam. When you talk about depression, depression is one of those things that can feel very, very heavy and burdensome and that everything feels dark. I was walking down my driveway the other day and it's winter, so there's nothing growing, no leaves. And then right there in the middle of the woods was this flower. It was just blooming in the middle of winter. And I think that's a really great metaphor for even in the midst of this sort of stark landscape of winter, there's this flower there. And that's what we can latch onto and notice that. And that's reality. We're not creating that. I'm not coming up with that in my head. I'm seeing that as part of the world. And that's what is hard for us sometimes. I think we just go with whatever it is, and we fail to see other things that might actually be there too. And when it comes to humor, when we're depressed, it's very hard to see it. I did my graduate study on humor and depression, and that's what I studied and I found that when people are very seriously depressed, it's hard to see humor. But the flip side of that is, as people start to recover or start to feel better, humor can make the process easier and expedite it. So it becomes a tool. And I think the biggest challenge when we're feeling down is we just don't see it, because what we see is the down feeling, and that's what we're feeling, and we just don't see that bright light that might be right there. It's just hard to see.
Well, one thing that I've started doing is one of my 2023 goals, and it's something that I decided to do because I know my mom, who did pass away from ovarian cancer, when she passed away, tucked in her underwear drawer, she probably would not be thrilled if she were here any longer. She had been keeping notebooks of journals for years of her daily cancer during multiple chemo treatments, several, surgeries. And then every single day she wrote something she was grateful for. The gratefulness sometimes would be something that you and I would definitely not be grateful for. It was something that she was grateful for, that maybe she didn't get as sick today as she got sick yesterday. So it was something that was a negative, but it was a positive for her. And then some of it was just amazing gifts that she was very grateful for. And so for someone to be able to go through some of the things that she went through and to find every single day something she was grateful for, I don't think a lot of us who have healthy, beautiful lives, we don't have that same level of gratefulness. I think it's really important. If you can get yourself to where you're doing that gratefulness every day, you do have that breath of fresh air, where you do see life and the world from a different perspective.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention this a few minutes ago, that one of the things that we did when I worked in hospice, which I think was so critical, if you think about hospice, is for people who are approaching the end of their life. That's ideally the goal of it, is to help people with that transition. There was a quote by Abraham Lincoln that said, "So we don't focus so much on the days in our life, but the life in our days." We really embraced that concept in hospice. And the idea was, how do we help people to live through that process, to really live the fullest life that they can? And what that often meant was sometimes we had to reframe things. So like you said, sometimes your hope for the day would not be that you're going to survive this, because you know you will not, but that maybe your hope for today is, I won't have as much pain as I had yesterday. Or today I might be able to eat that sandwich that didn't taste good yesterday. So the hope changes and the goals change. And so I think gratefulness helps us to sort of refocus. And sometimes it's small things that are meaningful in that moment. And that's a really good thing to do on a regular basis, just to kind of reframe our day and make sure that we're not just filling it up with negativity.
I love that. So say that quote one more time, because I want to focus in on it.
So we don't focus so much on the days in our life, but the life in our days.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's really about quality versus quantity. And let's be honest, none of us know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Right.
So if you're not living fully today, you may miss that opportunity because you don't have a guarantee for tomorrow. It's probably just a good philosophy for anybody, not just people who are in that hospice experience.
No, I think that's how you should live your life in general. They used to say death and taxes, but I don't know about the taxes as much anymore, but
right.
Definitely the death.
Well, by the way, since you brought it up, I was at a home one time with a patient, and the patient had died an hour or so before. I was with the family, and their tax consultant showed up at the exact same time that the funeral home showed up. And I'm not kidding you, the daughter of the patient went to the door, opened it, saw them both standing there, and went, "Oh my gosh, death and taxes."
Oh my gosh.
It was so funny. It was so funny, and everybody just burst out laughing. It was a great relief.
Oh my goodness. I bet the tax person turned hightail and left.
Yeah, the funeral guy was probably used to it, but not the tax person.
No. Awkward.
Exactly.
Well, is there anything else you would like to share that you think that our listeners would benefit?
Not really. I don't think, nothing comes to mind. I mean, I just turned 62, so I am now Social Security eligible, as it were, which is interesting because I think, one of the things my wife and I talk about is that we live in a community where most of the people are retired. Most of the people are 10 to 20 years older than us. And one of the dangers as we get older is I think we tend to focus more on negative than positive. And it can damage our sort of sense of wellness, really, and quality of our lives. As we get older, I think we have that tendency and we have to kind of fight it. And I can see myself doing it. I can see myself, sort of my knee-jerk wanting to complain about something rather than seeing the positive in something. And I think probably when I was 20, I was more idealistic and I didn't always see the negative. And as we get older, we get a little more cynical, and sometimes we get a little more wiser. We know the path. But I think that's, certainly for your listeners, that's one of the things I would encourage people to understand, that we do have that tendency. So we have to kind of get up in the morning and fight that negative tendency and try to look more in a positive direction throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. And I'm going to definitely share your link that will be in the description. If you haven't picked up one of Ron's books, please do. Is Your Glass Half Full?
You can definitely get it on our website.
Okay. And I'll have the link to the website, so that will be on there. But I definitely encourage any one of our listeners to please pick it up, because it is a delight to read and it's so encouraging. And there's some amazing quotes that really just can really get your mind thinking about your own life and how your perspective on it as well. So, all right. Thank you so much, Ron. I really appreciate you joining us on this podcast episode.
Yeah, thanks.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please listen to our other podcasts. They are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Alexa, and pretty much anywhere you enjoy music or podcasts.